Paul Lancer was a broad man, sun-hardened, soft-spoken, with a sorrow about him that had settled into his shoulders years ago. He didn't flinch at blood anymore. Didn't rush. He moved the way trees might walk if they could, solid, unhurried, worn by seasons. The massacre wasn't fresh, but it wasn't old either. 3 days, maybe 4. The snow had only just begun to cover the dark smears, the spent shells, the strewn bread that would never be eaten. Paul took his hat off. The wind moved through his dark, salt-dusted hair like a quiet mourner. He bent beside a shattered trunk, lifting the lid not in curiosity, but in respect. Child's dress, broken doll arm, a blue ribbon still tied. He put them back, hands reverent. That's when he heard it. Not a cry, not a voice, just a hitch of breath, so faint it might have been wind and wood. He turned, narrowing his eyes against the snow glare. Near the back axle of the second wagon, something had shifted. A glint of fabric, deep crimson, soaked through. Then a wrist, trembling. He moved fast then, boots thudding in the hush. Dropping beside the wreckage, he pushed aside scorched canvas and stiff wool blankets. Underneath, curled like a question too long unanswered, was a woman. She was small, maybe in her 20s, though her face was shadowed by soot and blood. Her dark hair clung to her cheeks, tangled and half-burned. Both wrists were bound with metal cuffs linked by chain. Her dress, though elegant once, had been torn at the shoulder and singed at the hem. She was breathing, barely. Paul reached for the chain, then stopped. Her eyes had opened, almond-shaped, deep as still water, and full of something he couldn't name. Fear, yes, but not just that. Dignity even now. She looked at him like a creature who'd learned the price of hope. "I ain't here to hurt you," he said gently, voice like warm wood. "Name's Paul Lancer. I ain't with them. I came after." She didn't speak, didn't blink, just watched him with that terrible, quiet steadiness. He pulled a small key from the pouch on his belt. It didn't fit. He tried another. This one clicked, and the cuffs fell away. She flinched, but didn't move. "You hurt anywhere bad?" he asked. "I got a horse. Ain't far." Still nothing, but her fingers twitched, just once. A yes, or maybe a maybe. He took off his coat and wrapped it around her slowly, carefully. Her body was light in his arms, far too light. Her skin burned with fever beneath the cold. She didn't cry out, just pressed her face into his shoulder, breathing shallow. The ride back was silent save for the steady fall of snow and the distant rasp of wind through trees. The mare walked slow, knowing better than to jostle her burden. Paul cradled the woman as if she were made of porcelain, trying not to think about the blood seeping into his shirt. They reached the small homestead tucked between the pines by dusk. Smoke curled from the chimney. Lantern light glowed behind the frost-glazed window. Aunt Helena opened the door before he knocked, eyes narrowing as she saw the bundle in his arms. "She's Chinese," Paul said before she could speak. "Found her in the wreckage off Ridge Trail. Chain still on her wrist." Helena didn't flinch. She stepped aside. They laid the woman on the bed near the fire, the only one left in the cabin besides Helena's own. Paul knelt to unlace her boots, more ribbon than leather now. Her ankles were raw, burned. He didn't ask how. Helena brought water, salve, soft cloth. Between them, they cleaned the dirt and dried blood, peeled back layers of suffering. The woman never screamed, though her breath caught when the cold water touched open skin. Helena murmured something gentle in reply. Words didn't matter. The tone did. "She's got grit," Helena said later, as they stood by the fire, watching her sleep. Whoever did this thought they broke her, but she held on. Paul nodded, jaw clenched. "She ain't said a word. She don't need to yet. Let her remember what warmth is first." That night, Paul sat near the fire with his rifle across his lap, eyes flicking often toward the bed. Her name. He didn't know her name. The realization hit harder than expected. Names made people real. He didn't want her to be another ghost in the snow. She stirred once near dawn. Paul turned, lifting his head. Her eyes opened slowly. This time, they didn't flinch from his. "I ain't leaving you," he said softly. "Whatever they did, whoever they were, it ends here." Still silence. but her gaze held his. In the days that followed, she did not speak. But she listened. To the creak of the floorboards, the rustle of the pines, the cadence of Helena's footsteps. She watched Paul repair the barn roof, fix the broken stool by the hearth, leave a tin cup of tea near her bedside, though it often went untouched. She never touched the food while anyone watched. But he saw the crumbs disappear. One morning, she stepped outside alone, barefoot, snow up to her ankles. Paul found her standing near the fence, looking west. "Your feet will freeze," he said, not scolding. She turned. For the first time, she spoke. "Why?" The word was rough, shaped like it hadn't been used in years. He blinked. "Why what?" She paused. Then, "Why help me?" Paul looked at her then, really looked. At the broken line of her collarbone, the healed scar beneath her jaw, the way she stood like she wasn't sure the earth would hold her. "Because someone should have," he said. "A long time ago." She looked away. That night, Helena told Paul what the girl's presence would stir. "She's not just wounded, nephew. She's marked. And you know how folks in town get about women who look like her, especially when they walk free. I ain't letting her go back to chains." "I know," Helena said, "but the world don't make that easy." And she was right. Because the next morning, there was a rider waiting at the bottom of the hill. Polished boots, clean-shaven, smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Evenin', sir," the man said, tipping his hat. "Name's Harlan Langston. I believe you got something that belongs to me." Paul's stomach turned cold. "She ain't something," he replied. "And she don't belong to nobody." The man's smile widened, all teeth. "We'll see about that." And just like that, the snow didn't feel so clean anymore. The days turned thin and quiet, drawn out like thread through a needle, slow and trembling. Snow crusted the windowsill, layering in soft breaths against the pane, while firelight painted the cabin walls with amber ghosts. Inside, silence lived like a guest neither welcomed nor shooed away. Mei Lian rarely spoke, and Paul never pressed. Some things, he knew, were too bruised for words. She moved softly through the house, as if unsure her feet were allowed to touch the floor. When Helena offered her a quilt to mend, she accepted without expression, and stitched beneath the window in the afternoon light, her hands steady, her eyes distant. The room warmed not from the fire, but from her presence, still as snowfall, but quietly changing everything. Paul watched without watching. He'd glance up while chopping wood or while tending the mare, and there she'd be, gathering water with slow purpose, or folding the same piece of cloth twice over. She never asked for anything, never asked to stay. At night, Helena would sleep early, her joints aching from the cold. Paul remained awake longer. Some evenings, he'd carve wood by the hearth, buttons mostly from old silver coins. Not because they were needed, but because hands wanted work when hearts were unsure what to feel. May would sit nearby on the edge of the rug, curled in Helena's old shawl, eyes drifting toward the flames. They existed like two silhouettes, man and woman stitched together by silence. She'd begun eating more, bread first, then broth. He'd noticed the way she cradled the tin cup, letting it warm her fingers before sipping. The way she always left a corner of bread untouched. Habit, maybe, from feeding others before herself. Paul had never known a woman like her. He didn't know what to say around her, didn't know if words would do anything but bruise. But he noticed things. How she flinched at the sound of boots on wood. How her hands sometimes twitched in sleep. How she stood for hours outside beneath the sky, even when her lips turned blue. He thought about asking her name again. But each time he opened his mouth, the hush between them felt sacred. So he waited. It was on the fourth morning, as he led the mare to water, that he caught her humming. Just 3 notes, soft and breathy, like wind curling through pine. He stopped mid-stride. She stood near the garden fence, one hand resting on a broken post, the melody falling like something remembered from another life. She didn't notice him. But when the sound faded, she turned her head slightly, just enough to know she'd let something slip. He said nothing. Later, she left a small bundle on the table, wild roots, scrubbed and wrapped in linen. Paul saw them and smiled, just barely. It wasn't thanks. It was presence. And that was enough. That evening, Helena found him on the porch, sharpening a dull blade. She settled beside him with a grunt. "She's still dreaming hard," Helena said. "Nightmares." "Not quite. She don't thrash or cry out. But I've seen that look. Her body sleeps, but the soul don't." Paul rubbed his thumb along the blade's edge. "She been through more than we know, and more than we could fix." Helena leaned forward, elbows on knees. "But you're helping her remember what not hunting feels like." "I ain't doing much." "That's where you're wrong," she said. "You're not touching the bruise. That counts for plenty." Inside, May sat by the fire, the stitched quilt in her lap. Her eyes were half closed. Paul watched her through the window a long moment before returning inside. That night, snow turned to sleet, beating against the roof in sharp rhythm. Around midnight, Paul woke to a soft sound, like a breath caught wrong. He rose and stepped lightly to the small bedroom door Helena had given May. It was open. She sat on the floor, her knees drawn to her chest, her hair clinging to her cheeks. Her eyes were dry, but her face carried something older than weeping, something ancestral. "I'm not going back," she whispered. Her voice was shaped like wind over stone, weathered, small, and final. He didn't answer right away. He knelt beside her, the floor cold beneath his knees. "You won't," he said. "Not while I got breath in me." She turned her head slightly. Her lips parted as if to speak again, but no words came. Only silence. Still, it said everything. In the days that followed, her silences changed shape. Less like armor, more like a quiet hand held out across water. She began humming more often, brief, uncertain melodies that hung in the air like spider silk. Paul never asked what they meant. He only listened. Once, while mending a saddle strap, he winced. May, sitting nearby with Helena's knitting, noticed. Without a word, she set her things aside, took his hand, and dabbed a cloth in warm water. She cleaned the small cut on his knuckle with such gentle precision that his breath caught. "Thank you," he murmured. She didn't answer, but her touch lingered a moment longer than needed. One morning, he found her standing by the grave behind the cabin. It was old, unmarked, but familiar. Helena's husband, Paul's uncle. She had placed a single pine cone atop the stones. A quiet gesture of reverence, of understanding. He walked up beside her. She didn't step away. "You knew him?" she asked. "I was 10 when he passed." "He was kind." "He was quiet. Like you." Paul glanced at her, said more with how he carried his shovel than with any sermon. She nodded, absorbing that. They walked back together, not side by side, but close enough for warmth to pass between them. That night, Helena announced she'd be heading into town in a few days for supplies. Paul's heart kicked. Alone. Someone's got to go, and someone's got to stay with her. May glanced up at them both, sensing a shift in the air. "We'll need flour, beans, and—" Helena paused, looking toward May. "Anything you want, child." May hesitated. Then, red thread. Paul smiled. Helena chuckled. "You'll get your red thread." After Helena retired that night, Paul lingered near the fire. May did too. He pulled a small coin from his pocket, began carving without thinking. She watched. "What are you making?" "A button. For Helena's old coat. She keeps losing the top one." May looked at his hands, broad, scarred, careful. "Your mother teach you?" she asked. His knife paused mid-turn. "No. She died before I knew her proper." A silence, but it wasn't heavy. "My mother sang," May said softly, "when she thought no one was listening." "She have a good voice?" "Gentle," she said, "even when she was angry." Paul tucked the knife away. "You got that in you too." May looked at him. "What?" "Gentleness. Even after all you've seen." She didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. Outside, the wind rose again, loud against the shutters. And deep in the night, as Paul drifted near sleep, a whisper floated across the room. Not quite a song, not quite speech, but something sacred. The next morning, Paul stepped outside to split wood and found a man waiting by the fence. Same polished boots, same smug mouth. "I've returned," Harlan Langston said, lifting a roll of paper. "And this time I brought proof." Paul Lancer stood with an axe frozen midair, heart already knowing what his eyes had not yet confirmed. Harlan Langston's boots gleamed beneath the frost, and in his gloved hand, rolled tight like a whip, was the kind of paper that made men into cowards and women into property. "I've returned," Langston said, his voice like oil on water. "And this time I brought proof." Paul lowered the axe slowly. His breath hung thick between them, turning silver in the morning light. He stepped down off the porch without a word, his boots crunching across packed snow. May stood just inside the cabin doorway. She didn't come out, but she didn't hide either. Her shadow flickered behind the curtain, watching. Always watching. "You'll want to read this," Langston continued, smug as a preacher in a room full of sins that weren't his. "Legal documentation, notarized in Denver. Says she belongs to me, leased from her father, if you can believe it. Bought and paid for." Paul took the papers, though he didn't look at them yet. "Her name ain't on this." "Foreign contracts don't always bother with names," Langston shrugged. "But it's her. You think there's another China woman out here on the trail who don't speak no English and answers to a man like me?" Paul let the silence stretch. The longer it went, the more nervous Langston became, shifting from boot to boot like a man expecting a dog to bite. "She didn't answer to you," Paul said finally. "She endured you." The smile vanished. "I could press charges, you know. Harboring stolen property." "She's not property." Langston leaned in, voice dropping low. "She is if the law says so. And Marshal Pomeroy is due here by noon." That name landed like a hammer. "You brought the marshal all the way from town." "I didn't bring him," Langston said with a smirk. "I just told him the law might need a witness." The two men stood in a long, icy pause. Paul could hear the wind rattling the shutters behind him, the mare stamping in the stable, a distant raven cawing from the trees. "Let's be clear, Lancer," Langston added, brushing snow from his lapel. "I don't give a damn about her face or her soul. She's labor, and I paid for her. Now I intend to reclaim what's mine." Paul's grip tightened around the rolled papers. "You set foot past that fence without the marshal, you won't leave upright." Langston raised his hands, grinning like the devil offering terms. "No need for threats, cowboy. Let's wait for the law. Let's see what ink has to say." He turned and strolled toward his horse, as if the matter were already settled. Back inside, the air felt smaller, the fire too loud in the silence it filled. "He has the marshal," Paul said flatly, setting the papers on the table without unfolding them. May stared at them like they were a snake curled tight. "They'll come before noon," he added. "Helena's out in the shed. I'll speak with the law." May looked down. Her hair, still damp from washing, stuck to her temple. She didn't tremble, but something in her seemed to shrink inward, folding in on itself. Paul crouched beside her, keeping his voice low. "You ain't going with him. You hear me?" She lifted her head, eyes unreadable. "If the law says I belong to him, you can't stop it." He hesitated. "Maybe not, but I'll sure as hell try." She shook her head slowly, her voice a breath. "They don't see me as a person, just a body, a contract, a silence." "I see you," Paul said. "That's got to count for something." Her eyes flicked to his, something like pain flaring behind them, then cooling again into distance. "I won't run," she said. "I'm tired of running." He didn't want her to have to choose that, but he understood. At noon, the marshal arrived, trailing frost and hoarse sweat and the weight of law wrapped in a tan duster. Marshal Pomeroy was a man of soft authority, jowls, slow drawl, and a history of favoring peace over principle. He dismounted slowly, greeted Paul with a nod that said he wished this had stayed a rumor. "Lancer," he said, "heard you got a situation." Paul jerked his chin toward the porch. "If that's what you want to call it." Langston stood nearby, smug as a fox in a henhouse. The marshal pulled off his gloves, glancing toward the cabin. "She inside." "She ain't hiding," Paul replied. "She's recovering." "Well." The marshal exhaled. "Let's see these papers." Langston handed them over with ceremony, like a man laying down royal proof. The marshal unrolled them carefully, his eyes scanning the elegant, foreign script, the rough stamps. Paul watched his face. After a moment, The marshal cleared his throat. Contracts, well, it's real. Far as legality goes. Says she was indentured to one Harlan Langston by her father. Labor services in exchange for passage and food. No timeline on service end. So she's a slave, Paul said coldly. Indentured servant, the marshal muttered. She was shackled in a wagon that got burned down. Left to die. The marshal looked up. The law don't cover cruelty, Lancer. It only covers contracts. That paper don't got her name. Not even a mark. You'd hold a woman to this who ain't never signed her soul away. She's foreign, Langston said, stepping forward. They don't write like we do. Her daddy signed it. That's all that's needed. Paul turned toward the door. You want to speak to her, speak proper. May was already there, standing barefoot in the open doorway, as if the wind itself had summoned her. The marshal stiffened, his mouth parting slightly. Paul turned and saw why. She wore the red-threaded blouse Helena had helped her sew. Modest, clean, elegant. Not a survivor, not a servant. A woman. Miss, the marshal began. Do you recognize this man? Her eyes moved to Langston. The corner of her mouth twitched. Not a smile. Something older. Yes. Is this your signature on these documents? No. The marshal hesitated. You speak English. I listen well, she said. I wait long. Now I speak. Langston scoffed. She's lying. I taught her English myself. No, she said again, voice sharper now. You taught me silence. The air shifted. Helena stepped from a barn, folding her arms. The marshal seemed caught between duty and decency. Miss, if you want to challenge this claim, it'll take paperwork. Witnesses. Time. We're not set up to. I'll testify, Helena said. So will I, Paul added. Pomeroy chewed the inside of his cheek. You understand, if I rule against Langston today, it'll be your word against a signed document. She's standing free in front of you, Helena said. Isn't that enough? The marshal looked at May. Do you want to stay here, ma'am? May didn't flinch. Yes. And if I walk away without enforcing this contract, you understand the man may try again. May come back with more proof. More guns. I understand, she said. Pomeroy exhaled. Then I'll make my report. That she's here by will, not force. Langston stepped forward. You can't. You can file your grievance with the circuit judge next month, the marshal snapped, already walking to his horse. Langston's voice followed them like a knife in the wind. You'll regret this, Lancer. You're siding with a ghost. Paul turned slowly. She ain't a ghost. But you might be, if you don't ride on. Langston's eyes burned, but he turned and mounted, spitting into the snow before galloping off, a shadow unraveling behind him. Back in the cabin, the fire burned low, but no one reached to feed it. May sat on the edge of the bed, her hands clasped tight, her breath coming short. You all right? Paul asked. I don't know, she whispered. He knelt in front of her, not touching, just there. You were brave. I was tired, she said. Tired enough to be loud. And that, he thought, was braver than anything. She reached into her sleeve then, pulling something out, a square of cloth, old and frayed. My mother embroidered this, she said, before she gave me away. She unfolded it, revealing a simple crane stitched in red thread. She said one day I'd know how to fly. Paul stared at it. I think, May said, placing the cloth in his hand, she meant I'd have to jump first. And outside, far off in the woods, something moved, branches cracking under hooves. Langston might have ridden off, but he wasn't done. Not yet. The days that followed were strangely warm, though the wind still bit at dusk, and the snow had not yet surrendered the hills. But something had shifted inside the cabin, as if the air itself had exhaled. May no longer lingered in the doorway, like a visitor waiting to be dismissed. She stepped freely now, swept the hearth without glancing over her shoulder. She spoke, when it suited her, softly and with precision, each word handled like glass. Helena had begun teaching her small things again, bread shaping, soap making, seed sorting. Not instruction, exactly. More like handing down memory. May accepted it quietly, not as a student, but as someone reclaiming something stolen. Paul found himself listening more than he spoke. She'd begun humming again, usually at dusk, as she folded the same red-threaded blouse by lamplight. He knew now that it was a lullaby, the kind a mother might sing to a daughter she could no longer protect. They never discussed Langston, not directly, but Paul had started carrying his rifle again when tending the mare. Not slung over the shoulder, but held. Always held. One afternoon, while Helena napped, Paul found May in the shed behind the cabin, sorting through a pile of old timber. She was kneeling, hair tied back with twine, sleeves rolled to her elbows, her fingers brushing the grain like she could read its memories. "You looking for something?" he asked. "A straight beam," she said, without looking up. "Strong but thin. For a loom." "You planning to weave something?" "My hands remember how," she replied, "but I forgot the shape." He crouched beside her. "Then we'll build it together." She didn't answer, but she smiled, just enough to lift the edge of one cheek, then tuck it away again like a secret. By the next morning, they had 3 beams shaved and sanded. Paul taught her how to use the rasp. She taught him how not to force the grain. He'd never built anything more delicate than a chicken coop, but for her, he learned patience. She didn't praise him, but she handed him the nails. They began spending hours like that. No clock, no plan, just task and gesture. Sometimes she would pause, her hand resting on a slat, and tell him one line about her life in Canton. Never 2, just 1. "My mother made robes for brides," she said once. Another day, "My brother sold me to settle our father's debt." And once, "There was a boy I used to watch from the balcony. He climbed trees and brought down birds without killing them." Each time, Paul would nod, not prying, just letting the silence fill in what hurt too much to say aloud. He started noticing how her voice changed in the light, softer at sunrise, steadier after work, brittle when the wind howled. He noticed how her fingers curled in sleep, how her jaw tensed when Helena boiled meat, how her breath caught when children's laughter echoed from the valley trail. The loom was nearly done when the preacher's wagon came by. Reverend Alden stopped by once a month to pray with Helena and trade news from town. He was a gentle man, fond of riddles and carrying licorice in his pocket. But this time, when he saw May through the window, his brow lifted like he'd seen a ghost made flesh. "She's the one, isn't she?" he asked Helena quietly. "The Chinese girl from a fire?" "She's not a girl," Helena replied. "And she's got a name. Mei Lien." The Reverend nodded slowly. "Some folks in town are saying Harlan Langston plans to make another claim. This time through court." Paul's jaw clenched. "Let him." "It's not just him," Alden said, voice lower now. "Some are starting to say she bewitched you, that it's unnatural." "Then they ain't never seen Grace before," Helena said, folding her arms. Alden cleared his throat. "I don't share their thoughts, but I thought you should know." May stood outside during the whole conversation, watching crows hop along the fence line. When Paul stepped out, she asked, "Did he bring bad news?" "Only the kind whispered by men who never met you." She didn't ask more, but that night she packed a small satchel. When Paul saw it beside her bedroll, he stopped cold. "You're leaving?" "Not yet," she said, "but soon." He walked over slowly, kneeling to her height. "Why?" "Because your kindness has become dangerous. You're not a burden." "I know," she said, her eyes clear. "But you live among men who believe in ownership more than mercy. If I stay, they'll take something from you to punish me." "You don't get to decide what I lose," Paul said, voice quiet. "I already did the losing. Years ago. Now I'm building." She looked down, lashes trembling. "I've never been allowed to build." "Then don't walk away before you learn how." For a long moment, she didn't move. Then, slowly, she reached into her pocket and placed something in his hand. A tiny paper crane, folded from Helena's recipe book. "My hands remembered," she said. Paul held it like a prayer. The snow returned on a Sunday evening, fine as sifted flour. Helena had gone to visit a friend in the next valley. Paul was chopping wood. May stood on the porch, hands wrapped around a warm tin cup, watching the treetops disappear behind snowfall. A noise broke the stillness. Hooves. Not one horse. Several. Paul stepped out, already feeling the chill in his bones. 3 men rode into the clearing. Langston wasn't among them, but his stink clung to the air all the same. One of them held a folded document, tied with string. The leader, a man with a scar over his brow, dismounted. "Paul, answer," he called. "I'm listening," Paul replied, rifle across his chest. "We come bearing official summons. Harlan Langston's filed a claim. You and the woman are to appear in court 3 days hence, or forfeit your right to contest." "Where's the marshal?" "Didn't need him. We got a judge's seal." The man tossed the paper to the snow, as if it weren't worth the weight of his hand. May stood behind Paul, now silent. "What happens if we don't come?" Paul asked. "Then they'll come for her. And this time they'll come legal." The men rode off without waiting for reply. Snow closed behind them like a curtain. Paul didn't speak for a long while. Inside, May stood by the hearth, staring into flame. "I won't go back," she said. "I won't let them take you." "You can't promise that." "No," he admitted. "But I can make it costly." She turned to him, voice trembling. "I don't want you to bleed for me." "Then teach me to live for you," he said. "Teach me to wake up to something besides fear." Tears slipped down her cheeks, not from weakness, but from being finally seen. "You don't know what they'll say in court," she whispered. "Then let's give them something worth shouting about." The next day, they rode to town together, him on the mare, her behind him, arms around his waist. They carried the paper crane in a tin box. They carried the loom beam across the saddle. Proof, maybe, or just memory made visible. The town watched them pass. Some with pity, some with disgust, but some, just a few, watched with something closer to wonder. They arrived at the courthouse steps as the wind picked up, flinging dust and snow into their faces. May stepped down first. She looked up at the wooden doors and squared her shoulders. Paul reached for her hand. She let him take it. Inside, the courtroom smelled of ink and sweat and something bitter, like old lies. They sat together on the bench, surrounded by eyes that weighed them. The judge entered. And in that breathless pause, before words began, May leaned over to Paul and said quietly, "This is the part where we fly, isn't it?" He nodded once. "Yes. And this time we fly together." The courtroom was hushed, yet full of unsaid things. Dust danced in amber shafts of light that pierced the tall windows, and every breath seemed to echo. Mei Lian sat with her spine straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap, the red-threaded blouse pressed smooth beneath a shawl. Paul Lancer sat beside her, broad and calm, as if he could anchor her simply by staying still. Across the room, Harlan Langston lounged in a chair like a man who'd already won. His hair slicked, boots polished. He oozed confidence built on centuries of men like him getting what they wanted. The judge, a balding man with deep crow's feet and ink-smudged fingers, adjusted his spectacles and cleared his throat. "We're gathered to address the contested ownership," he paused, flinching as the word passed his lips, "of Miss Mei Lian, alleged to be bound under indenture to Mr. Langston." Paul's jaw clenched, but he didn't speak. May remained still. "Mr. Langston," the judge continued, "you've provided a translated contract, signed by a man identified as Mei Lian's father. Are you claiming this entitles you to custody of the woman?" Langston rose, casually unrolling the document with a flourish. "Not custody, Your Honor, service. She was entrusted to me for labor in exchange for safe passage to America. The contract has no expiration date. She's mine until I release her." "And you never released her?" "Why would I? She ran before the agreement was fulfilled. That's theft." The judge turned to May. "Miss Lian, do you understand the terms of the contract Mr. Langston has provided?" May stood. Her voice was clear, if quiet. "I understand what it means to be sold. I understand what it means to be silent. And I understand that paper cannot own a soul." The room stirred, faint murmurs in the back. "You admit your father signed the contract?" the judge asked gently. "I was not there," she said. "I did not sign. And I am not a contract. I am a woman." Langston scoffed. "She's playing the victim. She can talk now, can't she? That's new." Paul rose. "She could always talk. Just never to you." The judge tapped his gavel once. "Enough." I will remind the room that this is a legal proceeding, not a theater. I have something to present, Paul said, stepping forward. From his coat, he pulled the tin box and opened it. Inside, the tiny paper crane rested on a square of white cloth, the red-threaded crane stitched with a mother's fading memory. She came here with nothing, but she remembered this. Her mother made it for her before she was sold. It's the only proof she has of who she was before men like Langston tried to rewrite her. The judge studied it. What is it meant to show? That she is not nameless, Paul said, not voiceless, and not property. Langston stood, voice rising. Your Honor, this is sentiment. We're here for legality, not poetry. I'm here for freedom, May said, stepping forward now, her hands no longer folded, her eyes bright. You held me in chains. You burned the wagon that carried other women like me. You left me to die in the snow because I had nothing left for you to take. Her voice trembled, not with fear, but fury so old it had settled into her bones. And still, she continued, you come with paper instead of mercy. I will not go back to you, not as servant, not as wife, not as ghost. The room held its breath. The judge studied her a long while. Do you have any witnesses to corroborate your treatment under Mr. Langston's care? I have scars, she said, lifting her sleeve just enough to reveal the twisted mark on her wrist. And I have silence, the kind that takes years to burn through. The judge nodded once, slowly. I do not dispute the document's origin, he said, but law must bend toward justice, or it ceases to be law at all. He looked at Langston. Your claim is denied. Mei Lien is a free woman, and she always was. A breath escaped May's lips, sharp and soft, like the first breath after surfacing from deep water. Paul reached for her hand, and this time she took it without hesitation. Langston's voice rose, wild with disbelief. You'll regret this. You think this ends here? You're setting precedent that'll cost you in courtrooms down the line. The judge stood. Then let it cost me. I'd rather pay in ink than blood. Langston turned to Paul, his face twisted with rage. You don't know what you've done. You've turned her into a symbol, and symbols don't stay safe for long. I didn't turn her into anything, Paul said. She already was. Langston stormed out, boots ringing loud on the floor. May didn't move. She just stood there, letting the moment soak through her like sunlight on skin. Ruth appeared from the back of the room, her eyes wet, a handkerchief pressed to her lips. She opened her arms, and May walked into them. They rode home in silence, but it was a full silence, rich and brimming. The trees whispered overhead. Snow had melted in patches, and the path to the cabin looked a little less lonely. That night, the loom was finished. May sat before it, threading the red yarn through the shuttle with sure hands. Paul sat nearby, cleaning his rifle, watching her like a man who had finally found something worth guarding with his whole heart. She looked at him once, briefly, then back to the loom. I'll make something beautiful, she said. You already have, he replied. They didn't speak again. Not until the weaving began. Not until the fire crackled low, and Ruth hummed soft in the kitchen. Not until a new peace settled over the house, not loud or dramatic, but deep and real and earned. And in the stillness, May reached for Paul's hand, and said in a voice like braided thread, This time no one takes it from me. He nodded. This time we burn the chains ourselves. And outside, beneath a sky stitched with stars, the wind carried their silence, not as grief, but as promise.